My name is Megan Foster, and I was 29 when my parents decided losing my job was the perfect moment to teach me a lesson I never asked for. I got laid off on a Monday morning in one of those cold corporate meetings where they thank you for your hard work, slide a severance packet across the screen, and act like polite language makes disaster feel smaller. I went home, opened my laptop, checked my savings, updated my resume, and told myself I could survive a setback if I stayed calm. Then my landlord called and asked if I had a minute. I thought maybe he wanted to talk about the plumbing issue he had been ignoring for weeks. Instead, he told me my parents had just paid him $1,000 to get me out early. Not next month. Not at the normal end of the lease. He meant fast, quiet, and within 48 hours. For a second, I honestly thought he had called the wrong tenant. Then he repeated it, slower this time, like that would somehow make it easier to hear. I called my family right away, and somehow that hurt worse than the layoff. My older sister laughed and said maybe this was exactly what I needed to finally grow up. My father said I had been comfortable for too long, and maybe hitting bottom would force me to change. My mother said if I had to sleep in my car for a night or two, maybe reality would finally wake me up. I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not beg people like that to remember I was their daughter. I hung up, made one phone call, and less than a minute later my father was calling back in a panic, while my mother was sobbing so hard she could barely say please. Before I tell you who I called, what he said, and why my family suddenly stopped sounding so confident, tell me this. What is the weather like where you are right now? Does it match your mood today? And where are you watching from? I really want to see how far this story travels. By the time I got home, my phone was full of missed calls, but none of them came with the one thing that mattered, which was an apology. My father kept leaving clipped voicemails telling me not to overreact. My mother cried through two messages and somehow still made herself sound wounded. My sister sent a text that said, "This does not need to become a whole thing," which told me she already knew it was about to become exactly that. I went upstairs to my unit with my keys in one hand and my laptop bag in the other, and the second I reached the door, I knew Mr. Bennett had moved faster than he admitted on the phone. My key slid in, turned halfway, and stopped. I tried again, harder this time, then once more, slower. Like maybe the lock would remember me if I was patient enough. It did not. I looked down the breezeway and saw my life stacked against the wall in torn boxes, cheap trash bags, and one cracked laundry basket I had bought when I first moved in because it was all I could afford. A lampshade was bent. One of my winter sweaters was half hanging out of a split bag and dragging on the concrete. My bathroom tote had spilled open, and shampoo had leaked over a pair of flats and a framed photo I had not looked at in years. For a second, I just stood there staring, because there is a kind of humiliation that does not hit you all at once. It arrives in pieces. First, the lock, then the boxes. Then the realization that people walked by this and knew something ugly had happened, and nobody stopped it. Mr. Bennett came around the corner with that same careful tone people use when they want to sound reasonable after doing something ugly. He said he thought I would rather get it over with quickly. He said he had changed the lock for liability reasons. He said my things were still accessible, so technically I had not been denied access to my property. I did not waste energy arguing the word technically with a man who had taken $1,000 to help my parents make me homeless faster. I asked one question. Did you put any of this in writing? He hesitated just long enough to tell me he had not. I nodded, pulled out my phone, and started taking pictures of everything. The lock, the boxes, the torn bags, the ruined shoes, the leaked toiletries, the timestamp on my screen. Mr. Bennett asked what I was doing, and I told him I was documenting the difference between what happened and what he would later claim happened. That shut him up. I packed in order of survival, not sentiment. Birth certificate, passport, laptop, charger, medications, coat, shoes, Work clothes, 2 blankets, phone cord, toiletry bag, anything that could keep me functioning if the next few days got worse. They did. I called one friend I used to be close with, but she answered in a whisper and said her boyfriend was staying over and it was complicated. Another let my text sit unopened. A third sent me a heart emoji and nothing else. I loaded everything I could into my old Subaru and kept making trips until the trunk could barely close. The sun was already dropping, and every time I walked back for another box, I could feel eyes on me from behind curtains and screen doors. I did not cry there. I was too angry to cry. Angry at Mr. Bennett for taking the money. Angry at my parents for deciding disaster was a good teaching tool. Angry at myself for spending years believing patience would eventually earn me decency from people who only respected leverage. Right before I got in the car, my father called again. I let it ring. Then my mother. Then my sister. I let all of them ring. The last thing I saw before I pulled out of the lot was my own apartment door, clean and locked, already looking like it belonged to someone else. I drove until the sky turned dark enough that the road ahead looked flatter than my future. I ended up in the back corner of a 24-hour Walmart parking lot, parked between a dented pickup and an RV with blackout curtains. And that was the moment it hit me that my mother had not been being dramatic. She had been literal. They really had expected me to sleep in my car. I reclined the seat as far as it would go, wrapped one blanket around my shoulders, and listened to the air ticking inside the cooling engine. Somewhere across the lot, shopping carts banged together in the wind. A truck idled for 20 minutes and then rolled away. I checked my bank balance twice, like the numbers might shift if I stared hard enough. They did not. My father called one more time near midnight. Then my mother. Then an unknown number I assumed belonged to someone they had recruited to talk me into being reasonable. I turned my phone face down, looked through the windshield at the fluorescent lights trembling on the glass, and understood something simple and terrible. I had spent my whole life trying not to disappoint people who could watch me lose everything and still call it love. I do not think I slept more than 40 minutes that first night. My neck hurt. My lower back felt like it had been folded wrong. Every set of headlights sweeping across the lot made me sit up and check the doors, even though they were locked. Around 5 in the morning, I gave up on pretending rest was possible, started the car, and drove to a gas station 2 exits over just to use the bathroom and splash water on my face. I caught my reflection in the mirror over the sink and barely recognized the woman staring back. My hair was tangled, mascara smudged under one eye, jaw clenched so tight it made my temples ache. I looked less like someone who had hit bottom and more like someone who had been pushed. I bought the cheapest coffee they had, drove toward the public library in the next town over, and waited in the lot until it opened because I needed Wi-Fi, an outlet, and a place where nobody could tell me to leave as long as I kept quiet. The library was warm in that over-air-conditioned way that makes you aware of every rough edge on you. I plugged my phone in at a table near the back wall, opened my laptop, and started applying for jobs like my life depended on it, because at that point, it did. Revenue cycle coordinator, billing specialist, front office manager, claims auditor, anything close enough to my experience that I could tell a convincing story in an interview. I was halfway through rewriting my resume again when my family group chat lit up. I opened it before I could stop myself. My sister had sent a photo of a brunch plate and a mimosa. My mother responded with a heart. My father asked whether anyone wanted to drive out to look at patio furniture that afternoon. There was no message asking where I was. No one asking if I had found a place to stay. No one even pretending to wonder whether I had eaten. I stared at the screen until it blurred a little, then locked my phone and set it down. That was the moment the self-deception finally wore off. What they had done was not a messy family argument. It was coordinated. My father supplied the cruelty and called it discipline. My mother wrapped it in concern so she could still feel like a good person. My sister treated it like entertainment because she had never been the one selected to be taught lessons with pain. I leaned back in the chair and let myself think about my grandmother, which was something I had spent years avoiding because memory had a way of making me feel both loved and used at the same time. During the last 2 years of her life, I was the one who drove her to appointments, sat with her during treatments, picked up her prescriptions, fixed the television when it glitched, and learned which tea she liked when nothing else tasted right. My father was always busy. My mother was always tired. My sister was always almost on her way. I had not done any of it because I expected a reward. I did it because she mattered to me. When she died, I knew there had been a will. I knew Andrew Calloway had handled the estate. I also knew my father and mother had stayed in her house afterward, as if time itself had turned permission into ownership. I had never challenged it because I did not want grief to become a property fight. I told myself keeping the peace was the decent choice. Sitting there in the library in yesterday's clothes with my entire life half stuffed into a car and the other half ruined in trash bags, I finally saw the truth. Keeping the peace had not made them kinder. It had only made me easier to use. At 11:17, my phone buzzed with a message from my sister that said, "Dad is freaking out. Whatever you did, undo it now." I read it twice, then opened the Notes app and typed out everything that had happened since the layoff. Every phone call, every statement, every timestamp I could remember. Then I called Andrew Calloway back to confirm I wanted him to proceed with everything we had discussed. He did not waste words. He said he had already started. He also said there was one more thing I needed to know, and when he explained it, my pulse slowed for the first time since Monday. Years earlier, when my father had expanded his equipment supply business, he had used me as a co-signer on a commercial loan. I had been 22 and stupid enough to believe him when he said it was a formality. Andrew had found the paperwork in estate files because the house title and the business records had crossed during probate. If I chose to force the issue now, my father would have to either refinance without me or settle the balance another way. That was why he was panicking. Not because I was hurt, not because my mother was crying, because the daughter they had tried to make powerless still had her name attached to something he could not afford to lose. I looked across the quiet library, at the rows of shelves and the people bent over their own ordinary days, and felt something settle in me that was not rage and not grief. It was clarity. A few hours later, I left to use the restroom and came back to find a bright orange sticker on my windshield. My permit had expired in the neighboring town lot 2 months ago, and parking enforcement had finally decided that day mattered. I paid the ticket with money I should have been saving for food and sat back in the driver's seat afterward laughing once, softly, because it was either that or scream. Then I drove to a grocery store cafe with free charging outlets and waited for my family to come looking for me, because by then, I knew they would. Andrew met me by phone first and in person later that afternoon, and if there is one thing I will always be grateful for, it is that he never once talked to me like I was fragile. He talked to me like I was the legal owner of facts I had been shamed into ignoring. We sat at a small table in the far corner of the cafe, near a window that looked out over shopping carts and minivans, and a cloudy strip mall sky that made everything feel flatter and harsher than it probably was. He laid out the situation in clean, practical terms. My grandmother's bungalow had transferred to me after probate closed. My parents had remained there because I had never revoked permission for them to stay, not because they had some automatic right to it. He had already prepared a formal notice ending that arrangement within the legally required timeline. He had also pulled the commercial loan file tied to my father's business. My name was not symbolic on those documents. It was real exposure. If that loan went sideways, so would my credit, which meant the same people who had just paid to put me on the street had also been keeping me chained to a financial risk I had agreed to only because I trusted them once. Andrew asked me whether I wanted to pursue both issues at the same time. I said yes, without hesitation. He nodded once, like that was the answer he had expected, and told me he would have the first papers served that day. Less than 10 minutes later, my father called. I ignored it. Then he called again. Then my mother. Then my sister. By the time the fourth round started, Andrew looked at my phone, then at me, and said, "You do not owe speed to people who weaponized yours." So I let it ring. When my mother finally left a voicemail, her voice was shaking so badly I had to play it twice to catch the words. "Megan, please call me back. We did not know it would go this far. Your father is beside himself. Please do not do something you cannot take back." That line almost made me laugh. They thought consequences were something I was doing to them, not something they had done to themselves. About an hour later, my sister found the courage to text what she actually wanted to know. "Are you seriously trying to throw Mom and Dad out of the house?" I answered with 4 words. "It is not their house." She did not respond after that. I stayed where I was because the cafe had enough noise to make a scene difficult, and enough witnesses to make my father choose his words carefully if he showed up. Andrew said he would prefer it if any direct conversation happened in public anyway. He also told me to keep everything simple if they confronted me. No long speeches, no defending my emotions, just facts, timelines, and the specific remedies I expected. He wrote them on a napkin in block letters while we talked. Document damage. Recover property. Remove name from loan. Notice remains in effect. I folded the napkin and put it in my jacket pocket like it was a map. Around 3:30, my phone lit up with my father's number again, then my mother's, then an unknown local number I guessed belonged to my sister borrowing someone else's phone. I ignored all of them. At 4:12, my father texted, "We are coming to talk. Do not leave." That was the first honest thing he had sent all week. He was not coming to apologize. He was coming to regain control. I bought another coffee I did not really want, because staying seated made me look less like a target and more like a customer. The cafe crowd shifted with the hour. Parents with toddlers left. High school kids came in for snacks. An older man read a newspaper at the table by the bakery. Life kept moving around me in that ordinary American way that can make a private disaster feel even lonelier. Then I saw them through the window. My father got out first, moving too fast. My mother followed, clutching her bag to her chest like she was the one in danger. My sister came last, sunglasses on, even though the sky was gray, jaw tight, phone already in her hand. They paused just inside the entrance, scanning the room until my father spotted me. He pointed without trying to hide it, and all 3 started toward my table. I did not stand. I wanted them to come the whole distance. My father stopped at the edge of the table and lowered his voice so abruptly it was obvious he had rehearsed not making a scene. "What did you do?" "No hello." "No. Are you okay?" Just that. I looked at him and saw not a father worried about his daughter, but a businessman realizing the contract he thought would stay silent had suddenly started talking. I told him I had called the attorney who handled Grandma's estate and asked him to enforce my rights. My mother made a small sound in the back of her throat, half sob and half protest. My sister looked from me to my father and back again, like she still hoped someone would explain how a $1,000 punishment had turned into a legal nightmare. My father tried a different tone. "Megan, this is family. We can work this out privately." I said, "You paid to make me homeless privately. We can do this here." The older man by the bakery lifted his newspaper a little higher, pretending not to listen. My father's face changed in a way I had seen only a few times in my life, the exact moment anger loses ground to fear. He asked what I wanted. I took the napkin out of my pocket, unfolded it under the table, and answered without even looking down. I want compensation for the property that was damaged when Mr. Bennett changed the locks and dumped my things outside. I want enough money to recover from the immediate costs you created. I want my name removed from your commercial loan in a way that cannot come back on me later. And I want you to prepare to leave the house because you are staying there on borrowed grace you no longer have. My mother started crying for real then. My sister whispered, "Oh my God," to no one in particular. My father leaned in and said, "You are blowing up your own family over a misunderstanding." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You paid $1,000 to put your daughter out after she lost her job. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a decision." He had no good answer for that, and for the first time since Monday, I was not the one feeling cornered. They sat down without asking, which felt exactly right for them. My father took the chair across from me like he was entering a negotiation he assumed he could still win. My mother sat to his right, tissues already out, shoulders trembling in those little controlled movements meant to signal pain without losing an audience. My sister dropped into the chair on the left and crossed her arms, but the performance from her was weaker now. The smugness I had heard on the phone was gone. In its place was irritation mixed with something much closer to worry. My father started with the version of events he thought sounded best in public. He said they had only been trying to motivate me. He said I had always responded badly to comfort and maybe structure was what I needed. My mother added that they never meant for me to feel unsafe. My sister rolled her eyes and said everybody was being dramatic, which was a choice so absurd I almost thanked her for it, because nothing exposes cruelty faster than hearing it said out loud in a normal tone. I kept my voice steady and low. I asked my mother what she thought was going to happen after she told me sleeping in my car might wake me up. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I asked my father what exactly he believed the lesson was in paying my landlord to get rid of me 48 hours after I lost my income. He said he wanted me to stop relying on excuses. I asked him whether he considered a corporate layoff an excuse, or just convenient timing for his little experiment. His jaw tightened. My sister jumped in and said I was making this all sound worse than it was. That was when I turned to her and asked the one question she was least prepared to answer. "Did you think it was funny before or after you found out I had nowhere to go?" She looked away first. That told me enough. My father tried to move the conversation outside, then suggested we go to his car where we could speak freely, which of course meant speak without witnesses. I said no both times. He asked if I really intended to evict my own parents. I said I intended to stop protecting people who kept confusing access with ownership. My mother wiped at her eyes and said, "We raised you," as if that sentence alone should have erased every other one. I said, "And then you paid to throw me out when I was already down. So let us stop acting like history only counts when it helps you." A young employee came by to wipe the next table and lingered just long enough to make my father lower his voice another notch. He asked whether Andrew had really found a way to force the loan issue. I said yes. The color changed in his face so fast it was almost fascinating. My sister noticed too. She turned to him and said, "Wait, what loan?" Neither of my parents answered her immediately. I realized then that they had never fully told her how much of their stability had been quietly balanced on my name. That almost made the moment sweeter. My father finally said the business finances were none of her concern. She snapped back that if they were about to lose the house, it absolutely was her concern. My mother started pleading again, telling us not to do this here, not to turn on one another, as if she had not helped light the match that brought us to that table. I let them unravel for almost a full minute before I interrupted. I told them there were only 3 paths forward. 1, they could cooperate and move through Andrew. 2, they could fight everything and spend more money doing it while the deadlines stayed exactly where they were. Or 3, They could keep trying to guilt me and discover just how little guilt works when the person carrying it has finally put it down. My father stared at me like he was still waiting for softness to return if he held eye contact long enough. It did not. My sister asked whether I had somewhere to stay. Not because she cared, because she wanted to know how desperate I still was. I told her that was no longer the relevant question. The relevant question was how fast our father could untangle me from the loan before the bank started asking why the co-signer wanted out under pressure. That got his attention faster than anything else. He leaned forward and hissed that I had no idea what kind of damage I could do. I said, "I know exactly what damage looks like. I packed it into my car yesterday." My mother reached for my hand then, the same hand she had never reached for when I was sitting alone in a parking lot the night before, and I pulled mine back before she touched me. That seemed to hurt her more than anything I had said, which was maybe the most honest reaction she had all week. She asked whether there was anything they could do right now to make this stop. I said yes. Send money today for the immediate losses you caused. Tell your attorney to speak to Andrew and start packing. My sister made a disbelieving sound. My father stared at me a second longer, then stood up so fast his chair scraped. He did not yell. That would have given him away. He just said, "This is not over." I stood too, picked up my bag, and told him, "No, it is not. That is what I have been trying to tell you." Then I left them there in the cafe with their untouched drinks, their collapsing story, and the first real understanding of what it feels like when the person you thought would keep absorbing the damage decides not to anymore. The next 2 weeks moved fast and ugly. Every morning was survival. Job applications, interviews, cheap room searches, and stretching money far enough to make it through one more day. Every afternoon brought another wave from my family. My father stopped pretending this was about feelings and started talking like a man trying to contain a business problem. He asked to meet at a diner off the interstate, and I agreed once because Andrew said frightened people usually reveal the truth when they start negotiating. My father showed up looking exhausted and offered temporary help if I would pause everything. Rent money, a job lead, storage for my things. It sounded generous until you remembered who was offering it. I told him I was not trading legal protection for promises from the same man who had paid to push me out. He said refinancing the loan would take time. I told him time was exactly what he had denied me when he paid Mr. Bennett. My mother tried next with long messages full of selective regret, church language, and talk about family. She said she loved me. She said mothers make mistakes. She never said she was wrong. My sister shifted the fastest. First dismissive, then defensive, then suddenly apologetic once she realized the damage was real. She said she never thought Mr. Bennett would change the locks that quickly. She said she assumed I would stay with a friend. It was the kind of apology that admitted details without admitting guilt. While they talked, Andrew worked. He sent a demand letter to Mr. Bennett over the lockout, the damaged property, and the lack of proper written process. Mr. Bennett folded almost immediately. He agreed to return my full deposit, waive the remaining balance, and contribute toward the things that had been ruined. It did not fix everything, but it proved something important. People sound bold until they are forced to explain themselves on paper. The real pressure landed on my father. Once Andrew notified the lender that the co-signer wanted a formal release, their tone changed. They wanted updated financials, clarification, and a plan. My father hated that because business risk was the only language he truly respected. He called one night and said I was putting innocent employees at risk. I asked whether innocence had mattered when he and my mother decided sleeping in my car might build character. He hung up. 2 days later, he called back and asked what it would take to settle everything cleanly. That was the moment I knew he had stopped being angry and started being afraid. Andrew handled the numbers, but I set the terms. My name off the loan completely, with written confirmation. Reimbursement for the damage they caused. No direct contact unless I allowed it. No fight over the house. My father resisted the money part more than anything else, because paying meant admitting this had not been a lesson. It had been harm. The final proposal came through Andrew a few days later. My father had arranged refinancing help through a business partner and liquidated enough inventory to calm the lender. In exchange for my full release from the loan, there would also be a settlement covering the forced move, short-term lodging, damaged property, legal costs, and the immediate financial hit. It was not kindness. It was the price of getting me out of the trap he had tied me to years earlier. I accepted after Andrew tightened the wording. The money hit my account on a Friday morning. I used it right away. I paid the parking ticket, booked a week at an extended stay hotel, replaced the most necessary clothes and toiletries, and set aside taxes because chaos still comes with bills. Then I bought a new deadbolt set, 2 outdoor cameras, and a locking file box for every document with my name on it. The following Monday, I got an offer from a medical billing group across town. The pay was not glamorous, but it was steady. The benefits were solid, and for the first time in weeks, I could see a way forward that did not include begging anyone. My family found out through timing, not through me. By then, Andrew had already coordinated move-out dates for the house. My sister sent one final message asking whether I was really going to let our parents move into an apartment after everything they had done for me. I answered once. They chose this the day they paid to have me removed from my home. Do not message me again unless it is through counsel. She never replied. Sometimes silence is not defeat. Sometimes it is the first sign that someone finally understands the bill has come due. My parents were out of the house by the deadline. There was no dramatic showdown, no miracle, no tearful family reset. What happened was simpler and far more satisfying. A rental truck pulled up at 8 in the morning. My father moved like a man trying to protect what little pride he had left. My mother looked smaller than I had ever seen her, not because I felt sorry for her, but because self-righteousness takes up a lot of space, and she no longer had enough of it left to stand tall. My sister arrived late, wore oversized sunglasses, and carried only the light boxes. Nobody argued with me because there was nothing left to argue about. The papers were signed. The loan release was done. The notice had been served properly. The settlement funds had cleared. Facts had done what feelings never could. When the truck finally pulled away, I stood in the driveway of my grandmother's bungalow and watched until the taillights disappeared. Then I went inside, changed every lock that afternoon, installed cameras before dark, and sat on the living room floor among unpacked boxes, listening to the quiet. It was the first safe quiet I had felt in years, not the fake peace of swallowing mistreatment to avoid conflict, real quiet. The kind that comes after a door closes on people who kept confusing your patience for permission. My new job started the following week. I bought secondhand furniture where I could, replaced only what I needed, kept my spending tight, and started building an emergency fund with a seriousness I wish I had learned sooner. Not because what happened was my fault. It was not. But because adulthood teaches you that innocence does not protect you from paperwork, leverage, or entitlement. Preparation does. I froze my credit. I organized every important document. I changed passwords I should have changed years earlier. I updated mailing addresses, emergency contacts, and every small administrative detail I had put off. Survival is rarely dramatic. Most of the time, it looks like receipts, file boxes, and choosing not to trust people just because they share your last name. My mother tried 2 more times to reach me after the move, once by email and once through a forwarded card. Both said she missed me. Both said families should heal. Neither said she regretted helping make me homeless. My father sent one message through Andrew asking whether, in time, I might reconsider how hard I had been on them. I read it once and laughed, because some people will always call consequences cruelty when those consequences finally land on them. I did not respond. My sister posted vague quotes online for a while about betrayal and toxic people, then stopped. Life moved on the way it always does. The people who were inconvenienced by my silence found new audiences. The people who had counted on my compliance learned to live without it. And I learned something I hope never leaves me. Family is not a free pass. Shared blood does not turn harm into help, and it does not turn control into love just because somebody says they meant well. People will often call you selfish the moment you stop being useful to them. They will say you are cold when all you are really doing is refusing to keep bleeding where they can reach you. They will accuse you of breaking the family when what they really mean is you stopped holding together a system that only worked because you were willing to be hurt inside it. If there is a lesson in my story, it is not revenge for the sake of revenge. It is that dignity matters more than approval, and boundaries are not cruelty. They are protection. If someone uses money, housing, guilt, or family roles to control you, pay attention to the practical pieces first. Know what is in your name. Read what you sign. Keep copies. Build even a small emergency cushion if you can, because hard times get more dangerous when the wrong people know you have nowhere to go. And never let someone convince you that suffering in silence is the same thing as being strong. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is make one call, tell the truth, and let consequences do the talking. I lost a job that month, but I found something far more valuable. I found out who my family was when I was vulnerable, and I found out who I could become once I stopped mistaking endurance for love. If you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, I hope you chose yourself. And if you did not the first time, I hope you do the next. Sometimes that choice saves more than your pride. Sometimes it saves your whole life.